And it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone that I've worked with for the last 2.5 years who's done an absolutely spectacular job in helping us be the wind beneath the wings of the science that we just heard, and also hopefully keeps us all out of jail. So I'm going to turn this over to Lisa Denney from CHR, who most of you know, and she'll talk to us about event reporting and research compliance.
Good morning. Maybe if I start walking, I'll start taking this off. So it's an honor to be here with everyone, and also nice to see some familiar faces, which is always fun and important. So I'm with the Human Research Protection Program. Just by overall programmatic view, the Human Research Protection Program is the Committee on Human Research, the CHR, which is the committee that reviews all of the human research protocols that you see on the CRSs, as well as the Quality Improvement Unit, which is the unit that I lead that does a lot of the monitoring and the auditing. I think some of you have had us come out either looking at your particular studies. My current monitors are Beth Shields and Larry Jerez. Maybe you have also worked with Susie Coral. She has left the university. So we look at the studies, we're looking for compliance, and we're having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun meeting investigators. Our goal is to work with investigators to improve their research and to help them with overall compliance. Today, though, I've been asked to talk about post-approval reporting, which are adverse events and approving of protocol violations and incidents. And I'm also going to talk about general compliance. And the reason why I want to talk about general compliance is because many of you see events happening, things happening on the floors at the CRS, and you kind of have this, well, that's not right. And I want you to know that here at the university, the Human Research Protection Program sits within the Office of Ethics and Compliance, and the director of that office, Elizabeth Boyd, who will be speaking a little bit later. And Elizabeth is really bringing an overall tone and an energy to compliance at this university, the need for it, and the support for that. And so I want you to know that our office is helping her from a patient safety perspective and supporting compliance in research here at this university. And so maybe we've been a little bit separated, and we thought that our office has just been dealing with specific non-compliance on research protocols, what investigators are doing on research studies, but it's bigger than that, it's broader than that, and it's important for this university to know that we're here to support if you see something wrong, if you see something that may not be right, if you have questions, we're here to help with that. So I'm going to divide my presentation into two components and to give you a background of what the CHR does, what the committees do, what we look at when it comes to adverse event reporting, and what our roles and responsibilities are to let you know how this university manages that from the CHR perspective. So we'll talk about post-approval events, what are concern complaints, and I have a couple what-ifs, and we'll see where that goes. So let's just talk about types of post-approval events. We also have other post-approval events like study closeout, but from the specific of this presentation, I really want to just talk about serious and unexpected adverse events and protocol violations and incidents. And these are really driven by what you see happening in the conduct of research. Adverse events that may happen to participants that are participating in studies, or violations that may happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit different about what between violations and incidents and who should be reporting those. So what are adverse events? What does the Committee on Human Research need to see? Now again, the Committee on Human Research is the body that is there as a committee of faculty to review human subjects research for ethics, regulatory compliance, and to look at patient protection and patient safety in the conduct of research. So an adverse event, very long definition, I don't want to just read it to you, but it's an unfavorable event that happens to the subject. It can basically be a subject is receiving a drug and they have a rash. It could be a subject is receiving a drug and they have a myocardial infarction. Those are adverse events. And there's a real range in a lot of these studies of adverse events that occur. And these happen, they are a reality, they're not bad, they're just a reality of doing the research that we have. But what needs to be reported to the CHR? So The PI, if it's an adverse event that happens internally, when I say internally, I mean on the CRC, within the studies that you're conducting, what needs to be submitted to the CHR are events that are definitely, probably, or possibly related, and serious or unexpected. So the events that are listed in the consent form, let's say, I'm just going to go to the rash because it's a very benign example. Let's say the rash is listed in the consent form, and you as a nurse or you working on the floor see this happening to a patient. The first thing you want to know is this expected in the study? And we would look for that in the consent form. Is it definitely related? The answer is yes, but is it expected? And if it's expected, it does not need to be reported. So the question is, when does it need to maybe be reported? And the reality of it is that we see events that are reported, that are already in the consent form, reported to the CHR when the frequency is happening at a much higher rate. And we would consider that to be unexpected or serious. So if you're seeing the frequency of the rash is happening every 2 days or in a much larger body part, that would be when the CHR would need to see the rash because it's not adequately described in the consent form. And from the CHR's perspective, we expect that the PI and the study coordinator, of course, are monitoring these adverse events and reporting them to the CHR. With regard to the research that's done on the CRS, you play a very integral role because you're intervening with the participants. And so we expect that the research coordinator, the study coordinator, or the PI are working with you as a nurse, working with you as the medical director, working with you as anybody who's intervening with those subjects to have that constant communication, to look for events that may be weird or different that are listed in the consent form. Does anybody have any questions? So again, I just want a couple definitions of what is serious, very obvious. Death or life-threatening, if you're looking at the patient has to be hospitalized, if there's a persistent disability, or when you have to do an intervention that really is much more beyond to save the patient's life. I mean, these are really serious adverse events, and those are the type that the CHR needs to see, because what we're looking for is does the risk information in the study need to be changed? Does it need to be corrected, updated to more accurately reflect the risks in the actual study? We also talk about what is unexpected. Again, we look at, is it more serious than expected? My minor example of the rash, is it more serious than what is expected listed in the consent form? Is it more frequent? Is it due to an overdose of study medications? And a lot of these things happen. Patients maybe get the wrong medication, not that they happen very often. Sometimes patients get more medication that they need. Sometimes patients are given pills to take in the morning and evening, and they accidentally take their 2 doses at one time. And these events happen, but adverse events, of course, happen as a result of them. And so the CHR needs to be informed of them. So that's adverse events. Those are events that, again, happen to the subjects. Now, let's talk a little bit about violations and incidents as part of the CHR and the conduct of the study. Here's my little fun. Yes, Mark, go ahead.
I have a question about adverse events.
Yeah.
If you're done.
Go ahead.
So it's not clear to me what the role of CRC staff is, because those things you showed in that previous slide are judgment, clinical judgment,
yep,
that the investigator is best equipped to
yes,
do. What's the role of CRC staff in adverse event reporting?
Right. So from the CHR's perspective, the question is, what is the role of the CRC staff with regard to adverse events? And the role really at that point comes to be the expectation that there's a communication.
So that the PI is
aware
and informed.
Alert and informed. The CRC staff, I should make this clarity, thank you, that the CRC staff is not expected to report to the CHR. No. The expectation is that there's a line of communication. And from what I understand, that line of communication is pretty good. I mean, there's a really good working relationship with all the infrastructure that you have set up for studies being conducted on the CRCs. So this is just a little introduction to violations. Can you conduct a study without CHR approval? The answer is no, and I think that's pretty well understood. But let's talk about some other violations and incidents that occur on research. So the CHR anybody recognizes that there are deviations from a research protocol. They may be minor or major. And the CHR really wants to be informed, must be informed, about major protocol violations. So there are violations that may change the research study design. And so let's think about, I'll talk about some examples. And we can think about where the CRC staff plays a role in some of these violations that may occur, that you may see, that you may need to inform the PI or the study coordinator about these events. So they are technically procedures within the investigator's control. Now in your situation, you are operating sometimes under the direction of the medical orders of the investigator. And so there may be events that occur that you have to inform the principal investigator about. So when do you have to report or have the PI report to the CHR? Or when does you need to inform the PI technically of everything, but when does the PI have to report to the CHR and when does he or she not? So major protocol violations, and I think some of these are pretty obvious. Incorrect research, treatment, or intervention given. We've seen these. Enrollment of participant ineligible for CHR approved protocol. There are times when research participants may have a certain level, a blood level, or what we see actually very common is age. The protocol is meant to include individuals from ages of 40 to 60, and the participant is 61. Is that a reportable event? Now, it is because you enrolled someone who is ineligible. The research, the CHR would expect that there be an approval from the sponsor for that eligibility and to get a modification, a one-time patient modification, before you enroll that subject that is not eligible for the study. A safety procedure or lab that is not conducted, or a lab that is done outside of a study window. Now, there's a lot of labs that are done that are not safety issues. There may be PK issues, so you're looking at certain blood levels. And the question is, does that have to be submitted to the CHR? And the one thing that we come back to is this a safety lab? What is the risk to the participant when we talk about labs and procedures that are not done? And there are many reasons we understand why labs or procedures do not get done. The patient doesn't come to the clinic that day. The patient had to leave early. But the CHR is charged with approving human subjects research studies under the understanding that all of these safety labs and procedures are going to be done. And so when they don't get done, are we putting patients at risk? Is there a bigger issue about patients? Our subjects, I use them intermittently, I should probably use the word subject, I apologize. Are we putting subjects at risk for the research? And that is what we expect the principal investigator to think about and communicate with the CHR. So again, what is your role in the CRC when you're involved with the human subjects participating on the study? Your role is to tell the investigator. Your role is to inform him or her about these events. And from your perspective, some of you maybe know the studies as well as they do, and you could provide your insight. We expect there to be that communication. Again, many of you are not conducting the informed consent or the recruitment, although some of you are involved in recruitment within the CRS. But if there's a problem with that process, that needs to be reported to the CHR. Again, what the CHR is going to look for is, does there need to be a change to the research protocol? Is there a problem with the way it's currently written and currently approved? So I have some more violations. If the study, this is a big one, and I want everyone to be aware of this, especially for those of you who are managing the conduct of studies. If there's continued intervention or involvement with a subject when the study has approved, that is a major violation. It is a federal regulation that the CHR has, the IRB approval is in place before any conduct on that can be done. That includes observing the subject, that includes making a phone call, that includes looking at data, and it includes looking at medical records. So it's not even just intervening or interacting with that participant. So if you are aware, and I don't think all of you are involved with the approval of research and knowing what is approved and what is not, and I know there's a lot of safety checks and a lot of double checking and verifying, but that is a very huge problem if an investigator continues to conduct research on participants with an IRB approval that is not in place. If there's a loss of adequate resources to conduct the study, investigators lose their research coordinators, they move on. The question is, who does that role fall onto? If it falls onto you, you need to make sure that either you have the resources to do it, or you decide from the CRC perspective that you cannot do this study on the CRC, and that is fully on your responsibility and your roles as the service provider. So there are kind of minor protocol violations and incidents, and I alluded to that. So the CHR, again, I want to take a step back and remind you, the CHR wants to review events that may need or would necessitate a change to the application. That is the major concern, and it's based on subject risk and subject safety. So there's minor deviations that occur while in the study. Things just don't always go as written, right? That happens all the time. They can basically be just a minor deviation. Let's say the participant can't come into the clinic that Monday, but they can come in on Tuesday. Is there anything from a safety perspective that, for the subject, that means there's any difference? Well, if there's not from a safety perspective, it's just the day of the appointment, it's their first appointment, don't report that to the CHR. Again, if they're coming in for an important PK blood level, then we need to get that reported to the CHR. So there are minor deviations, and the CHR understands that, and we expect that the research coordinator and or the PI are documenting these in their research file and their research study notes. And again, that is their responsibility and not on the CRC, but this is the bigger picture of how the CHR is looking at research here at the university. And of course, with everything, the CHR, when reported to the CHR, or even if not, we expect the investigator, as I said, documents and develops a corrective action plan to prevent these events from happening again so that they can conduct the study as written and as approved. So what are some major protocol incidents? Incidents are events on some level that are outside of the control of the investigator. They are events that occur that the investigator did not intervene. You as the CRC staff did not forget to do something or did something, forgot to bring something to the participant. So what are they? And the biggest incidents that we see, or the most common incidents that we see in our office, and you may get involved with some of this, is a significant concern or complaint. Now those concerns and complaints sometimes are from actual UCSF faculty or staff, and those concerns and complaints are from participants in research. And we receive a lot. I think we're up to about, and they vary, but we're up to about 30 for this year, and they vary from individuals feeling as if the investigator didn't try to help them get into the study and didn't treat them fairly and appropriately, to people saying, I need my money. They said they were going to send me my money. And I see a lot of you smiling because I think that's a common common problem. And I know that's maybe more of an institutional problem, but the range of complaints that we receive are those. And then there are some faculty and staff complaints that there's concerns about maybe loss of adequate resources. And that is where we as an organization, as the quality improvement, we go out and we do audits. We look at sites, we make determinations, and we report to whomever is one driving the audit. Many times that is Elizabeth Boyd. But we're here again to support the research. So if people are complaining, there's a reason why they're complaining. And we need to look at the validity of that complaint and to see if there needs to be a change, and that is our charge. The other big one is unauthorized disclosure of private information. So I am going to make a plea to all of you who are in this office. If you have laptops and you have patient identification, patient data on there, please get your laptop encrypted. We are pretty much every other month dealing with a stolen laptop that had unauthorized disclosure, and that requires us to deal with a lot of privacy regulations and reporting to those participants. And we're not talking about a couple, 10 people. We're potentially talking sometimes about thousands of people. So I'm just going to put that plug in because of the importance of it. So after the CHR has received these adverse events and protocol violations or incidents that meet our reporting criteria, what do we do with it? I mean, it kind of goes into that big black hole, right? People just kind of see the CHR as this body. Well, we are actually reviewing these documents, we're making decisions, we're putting them up to the IRB to review. And what we do is, of course, ask for questions. You may have to send something to a PI or to a study coordinator, and they may come back for clarifications about the situation because we ask for clarifications. What we do with these events when they get submitted is we're required to determine whether they're an unanticipated problem or serious or continuing noncompliance. And so our chairs make initial determinations whether they think these are possibly an unanticipated problem or serious or continuing noncompliance. And the implication of this is that these events that are determined to be one of these three have to get reported up and out. And I'll share with you who those are. So what we're doing is basically making transparency of our research organization, the events that occur here, and what the corrective action plans to demonstrate the overall compliance for the organization. So what is an unanticipated problem? It involves a risk to participant that is unknown. Again, I'm going to go back to my example of an MI. If there is a study, you're looking at a new drug, and a patient has an MI, a new patient, and it's not listed in the adverse event reporting of the consent form. It's not listed in the risks of the consent form. When you report that to the PI or to the research study coordinator, they're going to then submit that to the CHR. The CHR will then have to make that determination as to whether this is an unanticipated problem. We will then, in the background, be working with the PI and the coordinator to get them to update their consent form, which ultimately what that means to you is that, of course, then you're going to have to make sure that you know that the most current consent form has been signed. And I understand there are mechanisms within the CRC to make sure that they are signing the participants are signing the most current consent form and has the most approval. Is that true? Well,
I don't know. Is it?
Yes, it is true.
Well, I'm not sure that, I just have a suggestion, which is that if there was an electronic folder with all CRC protocols that got updated from CHR, that would be the gold standard to check against.
electronic folder.
Yeah, because we're kind of dependent on what the investigator sends us.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So, and that's, I review all the reports that your staff send when they come, and most of the major violations, which are consent violations, where they're not using the current consent, that's probably more than 50%. Right?
Yep.
And it would be very easy, I think, for our staff to check the dates if we, and to know for sure if we weren't dependent on what we're getting from the investigators, but if you guys just populate a folder with a new version every time.
We can talk about that. I think the concern here is what is the mechanism that is in place to make sure that the current consent form is being used, correct? Yeah, ultimately, and I think we could talk about that a little bit offline. I mean, many of you who deal with it from the CHR perspective have know about our iMedris online submission system, which we are working, of course, with the CRS to share access to information. So we can talk a little bit about how knowing what's approved. I think there's a little bit of understanding your systems and what you do on the floor and figuring out the best way to do that. So, but it is important, right? It is important to know, especially if you are having a new subject and you see that they haven't signed the most current consent form. So unanticipated problem, back to the risk of subject. So this, if a CHR determines that an event is an unanticipated problem, we would have to report it, and we'd have to report, and we talked about who we have to report these events to. Likewise, if an event is determined to be serious noncompliance. Now, serious noncompliance is fundamentally failure to follow the approved protocol, and it involves a significant risk to the university or the effectiveness of the university to do its job. What it is very serious events, and what happens here with these, many times from the CHR will ask for a very detailed corrective action plan. And how can this be prevented in the future? That is the main drive of what the CHR is looking for. So you, from the CRC perspective, may be asked to be involved in the corrective action plan. Maybe the medical orders are going to change. Maybe the procedure and the way the study is being done is going to change. They're only going to now have patients come in on Monday, Tuesday from 8 to 12. I don't know. I'm making this up because I really haven't been as involved with the down-the-road implications of some of the corrective action plans. And so from your perspective, you may have changes on the study that are driven from serious noncompliance. And that is just the reality with the CHR and the PI have have to do to help bring their study up to compliance and have them conduct the study as approved. Again, continuing noncompliance, the way the CHR has looked at continuing noncompliance is the continuing inability. You've had multiple serious noncompliance. The continuing inability, once you've been informed, you've made a corrective action plan to resolve your event. And we do see these events. We see them sometimes with the wrong consent form, multiple events of the wrong consent form being signed. And the CHR will ask the investigator to potentially put a hold on their study, to look to evaluate if they have too many studies going on, what is their organization. And this is all part of the CHR process with the investigator. I know you're not as directly involved with that, but again, it may have some implications for how you are doing your work. So what do we do? From the university's perspective, we report. We have to report out to the Office for Human Research Protection, which is our federal regulatory office, as well as to the FDA, to the VA, to maybe legal. We report many times to chairs of departments. We have not reported directly to the medical directors at the CRCs. We haven't had any events that really have driven that type of reporting, but we may report to the medical director because we recognize that the event is directly related to something that's going on the CRC. So that's the overall CHR regulatory role. So I'm going to talk a little bit about concerns and complaints, because I think people don't realize, I like to call them concerns, just to kind of frame it a little bit differently, but sometimes people have complaints, and they're very valid, and we need to work with them. And the CHR looks at these as ways to improve the work that we do. I don't know if any of you have ever felt this way, but sometimes I do. So I have some scenarios. They are actually a kind of a simplified scenario that I have heard from individuals on the research at the CRCs, as well as really from the university at large. And this really comes into what do you do in your role, and this really is directed to individuals who are intervening and interacting with subjects. And I know a lot of you are not, but I want to do the plea to let you know that we at the university are really focused on the compliance-driven component, and we want to support that research is conducted according to the CHR approval, and as well in a compliance way. We want to do it right. So, very simple. My example is basically a research coordinator or PI may ask you to do something that you shouldn't do. That's not in the medical orders. And giving someone a cup of coffee is that a big deal? And then what should you do? Does anyone want to say? All right, I'll tell you what I think you should do. Well, from the CHR's perspective, again, I want to talk about conducting the study as approved. And the question is it in the medical orders to do this? Can you do this? If someone's in a PK study, maybe they shouldn't be having any more food. They shouldn't have any more compounds in their body because you're looking at certain blood levels. And so you may be removed from the fact that they're in that certain 2-hour window. And the answer is, what you should say is, well, let me check. But this does happen. This has happened, I know, on other research floors. It's a really small example of other individuals coming in and wanting something done, but not understanding how that may impact the actual ongoing of the study and the results that are currently being done. And so what you should do is, depending on who was asked, of course, speak to either your supervisor or speak to the individual that you know that is working on the study, and look to see what's going on in the study. Now, again, you assume that the research coordinator knows what's going on, but you're doing your job, and it's specific, and there's a reason why you've been hired, because you have knowledge and skills, and they may not understand all the complications of what they're asking and complexities of what you do. So your next steps, or what are your options? I think your options are probably to make a decision if you're in the ability to make a decision. If you ultimately don't know, contact the PI. Remember, the PI, from the CHR's perspective, is the individual charged and responsible for the conduct of that study. So I'm going to put forth this one, which is a little bit more So I think this is, again, I've heard different versions of this, and I want to put forth that this is wrong. This may seem innocuous, but this is not why the participant is participating in research. This is not why the individual is on that research floor. And I want to encourage all of you that if you are put in a position such as this, that you stop and you don't always say yes, and that you look at, you speak either to your medical director, you speak either to the PI, or, well, I guess the PI is the one asking you, but you speak to the individuals in charge. Because again, the research protocol and why the individuals are put on the clinical research center is for specific reasons, not for a gamut of options that the PI wants to do on the side. And this is not to say that individuals are trying to do something bad. I think sometimes there's just curiosity and interest, and I don't mean to say that PIs are trying to avoid approvals all the time, or they may not realize that this is not appropriate. But remember, you are working with these participants on a very focused situation, sometimes more complicated because they're there for longer durations. But you have your role and responsibility, and you need to do that, and do that only. So I wanted to leave some time for questions. I hope I have some. And that is all. I also just wanted to give our information for our office. Lori sends her greetings, by the way. And sure, that's all I have.
So, thank you very much. That was wonderful. And, but don't go anywhere. So are there questions that haven't been asked during this presentation? Go ahead.
Yeah. Both a comment and a question. The comment is, in the NCRC, we sort of deal with the issue about correctly dated and appropriate consent forms by making the consent forms actually available to the investigator. Their consent forms are there waiting for the investigator to make sure that they're appropriately dated and it's the right consent form to do. The question I have is,
Do you want to say that?
ill patients who care units. Okay.
Yeah, in critical care units, so with critically ill patients, obviously serious adverse events are happening throughout the day. And the question really is not so much reporting a critical event, but the frequency of it. And frequency requires that a number of these events have happened over a long enough period of time that it takes you, that you can identify the fact that it's more than normal. At what point are you supposed to be reporting? How do you deal with that?
Well, I guess luckily I don't deal with that directly, so I can't answer your question specifically. But we are, from the CHR perspective, we are on the receiving end of these. And it is, and I think it's a very difficult question that you're asking about when do you determine frequency. I mean, from a research perspective, I almost want to make sure, I'd like to be able to see, and I think that's one thing the CRC offers, is consistency of an individual maybe working with a participant or a subject at one time, so that you can look to see if frequency is unique, because you also have the variability potentially of different individuals coming in, and so you have different time points at which people are looking at these participants. And it is, honest, to answer your question, it is something that we put back on the principal investigator to make that determination of frequency. And we expect that they have their research program organized in a way that they can monitor these subjects and document these adverse events. Because adverse events are supposed to be documented, regardless of whether they need to be reported to the CHR. The sponsors many times want to see these adverse events. And if you're conducting an NIH study, you definitely need to have that support and that documentation for those adverse events. So I don't think I can answer your question specifically, but that is kind of the general answer that the CHR would expect from the researcher conducting the research.
Any other comments, questions? Please.
Do you want this?
Yeah, why don't you?
Thank
Thank you for not making me shout. I wonder if you might want to comment, or other people here might want to comment on kind of a tension between assuring safety and policing on the part of CRS employees. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of issues of eligibility, which, you know, putting safety aside, a lot of eligibility criteria are for scientific reasons. And is there, what do you see as the role, if any, of CRC employees in looking at issues of eligibility, or is that implied when an investigator registers or requests a participant be studied?
The eligibility criteria really is determined at the time of consent. And sometimes individuals may consent to participate in the study, but they're not ultimately enrolled in the research because they don't meet eligibility criteria, which they can't determine until after they do the consent and do the blood work, right? So from my perspective and my understanding, it wouldn't be the role of the CRC staff to determine eligibility. That is not your, because I don't think that's ever written into your roles and what you're expected to do. And that is really on the PI. So I guess I'm going to come back to, if you, perchance, do find out that there is an eligible subject on a study because you know either the study very well or you have access, I would expect that you report that to the PI. Now, I think the question, maybe I'm doing a little bit of complication here, the question is, do you know if the PI has reported that? But, you know, we really do have to report that back to the PI. And if you do not feel that the PI is responding or has corresponded back to say, oh, I got a one-time patient exception for this person to be on there, then, and the person comes back to the clinic, I expect you to call me or call my office. That's a big deal, especially from the science perspective and from the conducting the research protocol. I don't know how many times the CRC staff are put into that kind of perfect scenario, but this is a big deal, and we consider it a big deal. So, but it's not the directive responsibility of, which is your question.
Mark, you have a question?
Well, I just want to...
Wait till we get the microphones for everybody who's...
So, yeah, I totally agree that it's not the job to police, but our staff, our RNs in particular, are sometimes given information by subjects that, as part of what they're supposed to do to just evaluate the subject, and that information clearly would make the subject ineligible. And what are they supposed to do?
Well,
I mean,
what have they done?
this is a real situation that's happened, and then they tell the PI, and then the PI doesn't withdraw the subject. And I've seen this happen more than once. Right?
Has the nurse, well, one thing, so we start getting into kind of management and actual integrity and research, right? I mean, that's really what we're starting to get into. And,
well,
I would...
I mean, the PI has reasons to believe that actually that's not relevant, and in this case, in this situation, but it puts our staff in a bind. That's my concern. I mean, it's not a common thing, but I've seen it over the years a couple of times. Yeah.
Are we talking about true quantitative values, such as age or blood levels? Or are we talking about maybe mental capacity?
Age, or you know, smoking is, you can't have smoke, and the patient just went out, and said, well, excuse me, I need to go out and smoke a cigarette, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Real world.
Right. Well, I think that I would actually look to see either one, the nurse director or the medical director step in. I would.
That's how I find out.
That's how you found out. and then what happened?
Well, I talked to the PI, and okay, so that's the right way to. I'm just looking for guidance.
Right.
Okay.
And then at that point, so if we are now getting to in an impasse.
Or the administrative nurse stuff.
Right. Okay. If we're getting at an impasse, then if we're talking about subject safety, the CHR definitely should be involved.
So let me just amplify the answer to that, because I agree with Lisa completely, and actually with your position as well. It's really a question of communication.
Yeah.
And communication really needs to be direct, not indirect, in these kind of cases. And I think we all ought to start from the place of we're all advocates for the patient, not adversaries among one another. I know that sounds obvious, but operationally it isn't always done that way. And I think if somebody reads something and sees something, the nice thing about our CRS staff is that you are all amplifications of the study personnel and the PI. You're going to see things that they might not see with the other responsibilities. So if I were in that situation, I would want to hear from you all that you saw something about this patient that's not, would make them ineligible. And then, of course, deliver that directly. It's not, and if you are not being received well, then I think that's when you get the nursing directors or the medical directors involved. That's why we pay them the big bucks, so they can help you make sure that patient safety is assured. Because once patient safety goes south, then everything that we've talked about this morning and all the lofty ambitions that we have are gone south too.
Are there any other questions? Well then, thank you. Our office is always here, and I'm very pleased to be asked to speak to you.